Blitz games have pros and cons. One pro of playing Blitz online is you get to play a lot of games quickly, and I like to do that to try out new openings and see what kind of responses my opponents are going to throw at me that I didn't consider. The con is Blitz isn't real chess. There's a lot of guessing. You're not fully analyzing. You can't play an accurate end game. You can't make sophisticated plans in a middle game, not unless you're a GM. So it's just for fun and to get a lot of games in quickly to try out your openings. So sometimes my Blitz games start out well and then go horribly wrong. All right, I'm white in this 5-minute game with no increment. I play d4, d5, c4, and the move e5 is the Albin Countergambit. I don't think it's a very good way to play as black. I usually get very good positions out of this opening. So black is offering their pawn on e5. You can take it, and then black pushes their pawn to d4. And that's the point of the gambit, is to get this strong pawn on d4, stopping the development of the knight to c3. And that pawn is protected by the queen. It also makes it difficult to push the e-pawn forward. So it's hard to play around this pawn. Also, the pawn on e5 is weak, and black tries to win it back. But white has a lot of good options for playing in this opening. The main line that I played is knight f3, but I will mention a trap. When I first played this as white, I didn't know the opening. My instinct was to try e3, trying to get rid of that strong central pawn right away, hoping maybe black would take it, and then I can trade queens and recover it with my bishop, and then I have an excellent position. And if black doesn't take, I was hoping to take back and get a strong center here. But the problem with the move e3 is the move bishop to b4 check. And now there's no good way to play from here. Best try is bishop to d2 to block the check. But then black has a surprising sacrifice and leaves his bishop en prise and plays pawn takes pawn. The best you can do here is take the pawn back with your f-pawn, and then you're going to get into a worse position. But if you take this bishop, here's what's going to happen to you. Pawn takes pawn check, and notice there's an attack on your queen, so you cannot take the pawn. You're forced to move your king to e2. And then the surprising pawn takes knight, promote to a knight. The point of promoting to a knight is to call check and not give white time to exchange queens. Now you still have to stay in contact with your queen. And by the way, you can't take the knight because of the move bishop to g4, winning the queen on d1. So you're going to have to move your king. Black can play queen to h4 check and get a very strong attack. So it's a trap. In the Albin Countergambit, after that pawn comes forward, don't play e3. Just play knight f3, develop sensibly, attack that pawn. Now, the main line continues with knight to c6 to guard d4. That's what my opponent did. I will mention I have had opponents in the past play the inferior move c5. That blocks the diagonal here, and now e3 is a good move. We don't have to worry about bishop to b4 check. So knight to c6, guarding d4, and you still don't want to push your e-pawn, so you want to get your light squared bishop out by fianchettoing it. So you play g3. Knight ge7 continues the main line, bishop g2, and now my opponent makes a move that wasn't in the database. The computer doesn't like this at all, bishop to e6. The main line continues knight to g6 here, attacking the e5 pawn, and white just gives it up, just castles and gives it up, and then plays against the d4 pawn and gets a good position. But instead my opponent played bishop to e6, and that does attack my c4 pawn. I do have the option of guarding it with knight from b to d2, but I decided on castling and letting it go. The time it takes black to take that pawn, I'm going to be developing. I'm also going to get a half-open c-file, and I'll be able to get another tempo on the bishop after it takes c4 by playing knight to d2. And after that, my knight can come out to b3 and attack d4. So I'm not worried about dropping the pawn on c4. And my opponent didn't take it. He played queen to d7. Often black castles queenside in the Albin Countergambit. I played queen to a4 to put pressure on the queen side here, put pressure on this pawn, this knight, and to vacate this d1 square for my rook to face the queen. Okay, my opponent castles into it, so to speak. I play rook to d1 facing the queen. h6. Okay, I'm not sure about that move h6, but I go ahead and develop my knight to c3. Notice the pawn is pinned. So I think I have an excellent position here, and my opponent continues with knight to g6, attacking my e-pawn. I'm not so worried about that pawn. And after thinking for a long time here, I came up with a powerful sacrifice. Knight takes d4. My knight is inadequately guarded on d4. There are 3 attackers here on that knight. But I've just unleashed my bishop pointed in this direction, and I'm trying to lure the knight off of c6 so I can take the a7 pawn and deliver a check on a8. There's nothing black can really do in this position. The engine scores this really high, about +8, +7 or 8. You're just going to have to lose material, I believe. So my opponent takes the knight. There was nothing better. Queen takes a7. That's a mate threat. There's a bishop here in g2, so there are 2 mate threats. Queen takes b7 mate and queen to a8 mate. So my opponent takes my pawn on e2 with check, and I have to be careful here. I do not want to take the knight because that leaves protection of my rook on d1, and black would take that rook with check and gain an escape square for his king. So I have to move my king. I move it to f1. I'm not afraid of any back rank mates here. I've got this knight protecting d1. I've got this square here. So knight takes g3 check, continues to check me. H takes g3, and my opponent makes what the engine called the best move. Bishop takes c4 check, king over, and he continued with best play, sacrificing the queen. Queen takes d1 check, knight takes d1, rook takes d1. So in this position, black has a rook and a knight for a queen, but I still have a strong attack on the black king. King to h2, bishop to h6, and I take on b7 with my queen, drive the king over, and check on b8. And now I would like to play at some point some discovery with this bishop, like bishop to g5, check here, and then take the rook. The problem in this position is after bishop to g5, the pawn can take the bishop and the rook would put me in check. So I wouldn't be able to do that. So I take the pawn on c7 with check. He blocks with the bishop. And now I move bishop to h3, blocking the h-file. I'm threatening to trade bishops on d7, but now I am threatening this discovery bishop to g5 check, followed by taking the rook. But my opponent saw that and played f6 to block the check. So there's no more discovery. I take the pawn, he takes back, And now I could have finished black off pretty quickly here. Instead, I just sort of trade down. Computer showed me afterwards that I can make a discovery with my bishop. Something like this to bring it into the attack. Because the rook can't be captured, there would be a mate on d7 covered by my bishop. But I didn't see that. I just traded here and then called check. And now if you were to look at the times, you would see I'm down to like 40 seconds in this position. There's no increment. My opponent doesn't have much time either. So this is just going to turn into a circus. So I'll spare you the rest of the analysis here. My opponent's king moves over and attacks my queen with his bishop. I don't see my queen under attack. I move my bishop. My opponent doesn't see my queen under attack. He moves his knight. I don't see my queen under attack again. And finally, my opponent sees it and takes the queen. So my opponent is now winning now. But time is so low, I decide I'm going to try to flag my opponent. I'm a rook down for 4 pawns, but he's collecting up my pawns fast. And I'm just moving around randomly, pre-moving. I have a time advantage, and I won on the clock. So not a very interesting ending, but we can learn something from that opening. Thanks for watching.